You are staff in this house. Nothing more. Do not mistake kindness for an invitation to stand somewhere you do not belong. Weston Drummond said the words before he fully understood how much they would cost him. Talia Monroe absorbed them without letting her face show what they had done to her. That moment was still 3 months away. On the July morning Talia first walked through the Drummond Estates service entrance, uncertain whether she had made the right decision in taking the job at all. Talia Monroe was 29, black, and had worked as a household maid for 6 years, in homes wealthy enough to need someone who noticed everything and repeated nothing. None of them asked too many questions about the long sleeves she wore in every season, including summer. She had taken the maid's position at the Drummond estate, handling Clara Drummond's breakfast trays, laundry, and morning routine, because the pay was steady and 15-year-old Clara needed steadier hands around her than the house currently had. If she was honest with herself, the Drummond name had also meant something to her long before she ever submitted an application. Weston Drummond ran Drummond Holdings, a shipping and logistics company that handled roughly a third of the cargo moving through the city's northern docks, along with a quieter set of obligations that came with a name like his. He had inherited both at 26, the same year his mother died in a house fire the newspapers covered for exactly 1 week before moving on. Clara was not his daughter, though strangers who saw them together sometimes assumed she was. She was Weston's much younger sister, born when he was already 26, and she had been an infant then, pulled from the burning nursery by a stranger nobody in the family had ever managed to identify. Weston had spent 15 years wondering who that person was. Talia had spent 15 years making sure nobody ever found out. She kept the scar on her left forearm covered out of habit more than shame these days. Shame had been the original reason, back when she was 14 and terrified someone would ask how a burn shaped like a window frame had gotten onto her arm. Her aunt, who raised her after her mother worked nights, told her once that some kindnesses were dangerous to admit to, especially the kind that happened inside houses belonging to men people whispered about. Talia had listened to that advice for 15 years. She was not entirely certain, walking up the Drummond Estate's front steps that July morning, why she had finally decided to stop. Clara answered the door herself, a habit the household staff had given up correcting, and looked Talia over with the frank assessment of a teenager deciding whether an adult was worth her patience. "You are not what I pictured," Clara said. "I pictured someone stricter." Talia told her she could still become stricter if the situation called for it, and Clara laughed, delighted, cutting the rest of the interview short. Weston appeared in the hallway a few minutes later, tall and precise in a way that made the room feel smaller. He shook Talia's hand with the brief, correct grip of a man who did not waste warmth on people he had not yet decided to trust. He asked her 3 questions about her references and 1 question about her availability, thanked her, and left the rest of the conversation to his housekeeper. Dana Whitlock, the family's head of security for the past 8 years, ran the household staff through the estate's routines that same afternoon. She mentioned that every new hire's background check ran longer here than anywhere else Talia had worked. "Standard procedure," Dana said, "given who we are." Talia spent her first week learning the rhythms of a house built for a family always half-braced for trouble, a rhythm she recognized immediately from smaller, less visible versions of it in her own life. She told Dana she understood, and meant it. The deepest parts of her own background would never appear on any check Dana's office could run, buried the way it had been 15 years earlier by people far more thorough than a modern background search. Talia had lived 2 floors below the Drummond family's old townhouse the year of the fire, back when the family kept a residence in the city proper instead of the estate they used now. She was 14, home alone on a Tuesday night, because her mother's shift ran late, and she had smelled smoke through the shared stairwell before any alarm ever sounded. She did not remember deciding to run toward it instead of away. She remembered the nursery window, propped open a crack for the humidity, and a baby crying loud enough to cut through the smoke alarm 2 floors down. She remembered handing that baby through the window to a stranger in the alley below. She remembered almost nothing else clearly until she woke up 3 days later in a hospital burn ward with her left forearm wrapped to the elbow. Nobody at the hospital connected her to the fire directly. She had been found 2 buildings over, disoriented and badly burned, having apparently taken a service stairwell down through smoke thick enough to erase all sense of direction. Her aunt, arriving from out of state to collect her, told hospital staff a vague story about a kitchen accident rather than invite questions neither of them had the resources to answer. Days later, her aunt found an envelope slipped beneath their apartment door, containing the hospital's name, Talia's room number, and one unsigned line. Let the fire remain an accident. She never told Talia where the envelope came from, only that some houses were dangerous to be connected to, even by an act of kindness. Talia had been too sedated that first week to correct her, and by the time she was lucid enough to explain what actually happened, the story had already calcified into a safer version to leave alone. She learned only years later, piecing it together from old newspaper archives during a slow shift at a hotel job, whose baby she had actually saved that night. Clara took to Talia faster than any of the household staff expected, trailing her through the kitchen with questions about everything from college applications to why nobody in the house ever talked about her mother. Talia answered what she could and redirected what she could not, the balance of a woman who had learned how much truth a grieving family could hold at once. She noticed, within her first month, that Weston visited Clara's wing of the house almost every night before bed. He checked on her with a vigilance that went beyond ordinary brotherly concern, driven by a fear he never spoke aloud. It was the fear of a man who had already buried one parent and refused to lose the only family he had left. Talia recognized that fear. She had lived inside a version of it herself for 15 years. She never told him that, of course, though she found herself standing outside Clara's door at the same hour more than once, telling herself she was only checking that the girl had turned off her reading lamp. The first real conversation she had with Weston happened by accident, 3 weeks into the job. She found him in the kitchen at midnight making tea badly enough that she took the kettle out of his hands, not bothering to ask permission. "You are doing that wrong," she told him. He looked surprised, then amused, an expression that changed his whole face in a way she had not expected. "Educate me," he said, and sat at the counter while she showed him. The two of them talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, the kind of ordinary conversation that made the house feel, briefly, like an ordinary house. Renee, watching from the pantry doorway, mentioned within the day that she had not seen Weston laugh in that kitchen since before his father passed. The comment made its way back to Talia within the week, the way good news always traveled fastest through a house like that one. Good things involving the Drummond family came with a history she had never told anyone, one she was not certain she ever would. Weston's father, Harlan Drummond, had built the family's shipping business into something close to legitimate before a rival's grudge burned half of it down along with the family's old townhouse. Harlan never fully recovered from losing his wife that night, and he spent his last decade obsessed with two unfinished questions: who had ordered the fire, and who had saved his daughter from it. He found an answer to neither before a heart attack took him 3 years ago. The official investigation at the time named the fire accidental, an aging building's wiring finally giving out, though nobody in the family had ever fully believed that explanation. Desmond Ashcroft had run the family's security and internal investigations for over 20 years. He was the one who delivered that official finding to Harlan personally, and the one who closed the file 6 months later when the trail, as he put it, had gone cold beyond recovery. Weston had grown up trusting Desmond's judgment on nearly everything, the kind of trust built over 2 decades of the older man handling whatever needed handling before anyone else even noticed a problem existed. A firefighter's account, buried in the original case file, described a young woman running from the building's rear stairwell moments after the rescue, burned badly enough that she should not have been able to walk. Nobody ever matched a name to that account. Harlan had hired investigators twice over the years, hoping to find her and thank her properly, and both efforts ended right where the official one had: nowhere. Weston kept his father's old file in a locked drawer in the study, unable to throw it away. He looked at it, at most, once or twice a year, usually in October, when the anniversary made the whole house feel thinner. Desmond noticed Talia's file crossing his desk the same week she started, an ordinary part of his ordinary process, though her listed prior address made him read it twice. She had lived, 15 years earlier, in a building 2 doors down from the Drummond family's old townhouse. It was close enough to the fire that the coincidence should have meant nothing, and yet it did not sit easily with him regardless. He ran a second, quieter check on her that nobody else in the household knew about, the kind of check that existed only in Desmond's own private files rather than the estate's official records. He told himself it was thoroughness, the same instinct that had kept him useful to this family for over 2 decades. He did not examine, that week, why the coincidence made his hands unsteady enough that he had to set the folder down twice before finishing it. October arrived the way it always did in the Drummond house, with Weston growing steadily quieter as the middle of the month approached, a pattern Clara had learned to read years before anyone explained it to her directly. She told Talia, matter-of-factly, over breakfast one morning, that her father got strange around her mother's anniversary and that the household staff mostly learned to leave him alone during it. Talia asked whether Clara wanted to talk about her mother at all. Clara said nobody ever asked her that directly, and then talked for 20 minutes straight, the kind of relief that comes from a question finally asked the right way. Talia found herself thinking about the anniversary more than she wanted to admit, aware of a date approaching that meant something entirely different to her than it meant to anyone else in that house. She had never once, in 15 years, spent that week around anyone who shared the memory. Being close to it now, inside the very family it belonged to, made the days feel unusually long. Weston sought her out more often that month, not for anything specific, but for the easy 10-minute conversations that had become a habit neither of them named out loud. He asked her opinion on Clara's college applications. He asked, once, whether she had family nearby, and listened, not interrupting, when she gave him a careful, incomplete answer. Talia found herself watching Weston more closely during those weeks too, noticing the specific way his shoulders tightened whenever Clara mentioned her mother in passing. He recovered, every time, before Clara could notice anything had shifted in him at all. She wondered, more than once, what it must cost a person to grieve that carefully in front of a child who deserved, eventually, to grieve alongside him instead of around him. Desmond's private background check on Talia turned up nothing through official channels. His own memory did the rest of the work instead. Buried in his personal copy of the original arson file was a lead Frank O'Yelleran had once flagged and Desmond himself had marked closed without explanation. It was a firefighter's note describing an unidentified 14-year-old burn patient admitted to a hospital 6 blocks from the Drummond townhouse's old address, the same week as the fire itself. He sat with that information for 2 days before calling Frank directly, the same detective who had worked the original case before retiring under circumstances Desmond himself had arranged. "I need your memory on one thing," Desmond told him, off the record. Frank asked what Desmond thought he might have forgotten. Desmond did not answer that question directly. He asked instead whether Frank remembered anything specific about the young woman the fire report mentioned, the one nobody ever found, and whether Frank remembered how thoroughly that particular lead had actually been investigated at the time. Frank's silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Desmond understood, before a single word came back, exactly how much trouble he had just invited into his own life. The anniversary fell on a Thursday that year, and Weston spent most of the day in his study with the door closed, a pattern the household staff had learned not to interrupt. Talia broke the pattern anyway, carrying in a tray of tea near 8 that evening, because she could not make herself leave him alone with it the way everyone else did. She found him standing at the window with his father's old case file open on the desk behind him, the firefighter's account visible even from the doorway. "I am not hungry," he said, without turning around. "I did not bring food," she said. "I brought tea and company, if you want either one." He turned to look at her then, and whatever was on his face in that moment was rawer than anything she had seen from him in 3 months of working in his house. "You should not be in here," he said, his voice sharper than she had ever heard it. "I did not ask for company." Talia set the tray down anyway. She told him gently that nobody should have to sit alone with a night like this every single year, that she understood, more than he could know, what an anniversary like this one actually cost a person. "Understood," he repeated, the word landing hard and wrong in the space between them. "You are staff in this house. Nothing more. Do not mistake kindness for an invitation to stand somewhere you do not belong." The words hit harder than a raised voice ever could have, precisely because his voice stayed level the entire time he said them. Talia did not argue. She picked the tray back up, told him, quietly, that she would leave him to it, and walked out of the study, keeping the hurt off her face until the door had closed behind her. She stood in the hallway for a long moment afterward, one hand pressed flat against her own scarred forearm through her sleeve, an old habit she had not realized she carried until she caught herself doing it. Renee found her there a few minutes later and asked if she was all right. Talia said she was fine, and meant, mostly, that she would be, eventually, the way she had taught herself to mean it after every hard thing in her life so far. Weston did not come out of his study again that night. Talia lay awake long after midnight, turning his words over the way she turned over most things that hurt. She wondered, not for the first time, whether she had made a mistake taking a job inside the one house in the city guaranteed to reopen every wound she had spent 15 years trying to close. Talia considered giving notice the next morning, standing in the kitchen with her resignation half composed in her head. Clara wandered in, sleepy and unaware of anything that had happened the night before, and asked whether Talia could help her practice for a debate tournament that weekend. Talia looked at her for a long moment, at the easy trust in a 15-year-old's face, and set the resignation aside, the sentence in her mind left unfinished. She was not leaving this girl over a bad night. She had survived worse for less than this. She thought, briefly, of every job she had left over smaller insults than this one, and understood, in a way she did not fully decide on purpose, that this time was going to be different. Weston avoided the kitchen entirely for 2 days, an absence Renee noted in silence, though Talia noticed it plainly enough herself. On the 3rd day, she found a note on the counter in his handwriting, and signed, saying only that he had spoken unfairly and that he did not expect her forgiveness for it. Talia read it twice, folded it, and put it in her pocket, not yet deciding what she thought about it. Some apologies needed time before a person could trust they meant anything at all. That same week, Dana Whitlock began a project she had been proposing for over a year. She wanted to digitize the estate's oldest paper security files, including a decades-old archive Desmond had personally maintained since before Dana ever joined the family staff. Desmond objected mildly, citing the sensitivity of old case material, and Dana, used to his caution by now, agreed to let him review each folder personally before it went into the digital system. It was a compromise that satisfied everyone in the room except Desmond himself, who understood better than anyone what specific folder that review process would eventually reach. Desmond spent that week retrieving the original fire investigation file from its storage box under a pretense of routine review, reading through it more carefully than he had in 15 years. He found, tucked behind the firefighter's account, his own handwritten note from that period, one he had forgotten existed. It was a follow-up lead on the hospital admission Talia's records had already half confirmed, a lead he had personally marked closed and never explained. He remembered, reading it now, why he had closed it, and how much the truth behind that decision would cost him if anyone else ever read that note the way he was reading it now. He called Frank O'Yelleran again that night, his voice tighter than the first call. "We have a problem," he said. Frank asked what kind. "The kind," Desmond said, "that does not stay buried forever, no matter how carefully a man thinks he has buried it." Dana's digitization project reached the fire investigation folder 11 days after it began, exactly the timeline Desmond had been dreading since the project's approval. He reviewed it first, as agreed, and returned it to Dana with several pages missing, explaining that the missing material involved a confidential informant whose identity remained protected even now. Dana accepted the explanation on its surface, though she logged the discrepancy anyway, a habit built from years of not trusting explanations simply because they arrived smoothly. She cross-referenced the file's remaining pages against the fire department's own archived report, obtained through a records request she filed independently of Desmond's office. She found a detail that did not match. The department's original report referenced a follow-up interview with a hospital patient matching Talia's description, an interview Desmond's file claimed had never taken place at all. Dana brought the discrepancy to Weston directly rather than to Desmond, an instinct she could not fully explain even to herself. She had worked alongside Desmond for 8 years and trusted him more than she trusted almost anyone else in that house. The instinct to bypass him this time felt like a small betrayal, one she could not quite justify to herself, and could not quite ignore either. Weston listened to Dana's findings with the particular stillness that meant he was more disturbed than his face was letting on. He asked her to keep the discrepancy quiet until he understood more, and spent the rest of that afternoon in his study with his father's old file spread across the desk again, reading it with new attention. He thought, more than once that afternoon, about the woman standing in his study a week earlier with a tray of tea he had refused, and about the words he had used to send her away. He found her in the garden that evening, helping Clara rehearse her debate arguments against an imaginary opponent, and waited until Clara had gone inside before approaching. "I owe you a better apology than a note on the counter," he said. Talia told him she appreciated the note more than he probably realized. She had noticed other things too. Her favorite tea now kept stocked in the pantry, and Clara's laundry schedule quietly moved off her heaviest day. A second chair had appeared at the kitchen counter, as though someone wanted a permanent place there for her. He asked whether she would tell him what she had meant that night, about understanding what the anniversary cost him better than most people could. Talia looked at him for a long moment, aware that the true answer was closer than he knew. She told him only that some people carried griefs well hidden enough that nobody around them ever guessed the weight of it. Dana confronted Desmond about the missing interview 2 days later, framing it as a simple procedural question. Desmond told her the department's report likely contained a clerical error, the kind of small mismatch that happened constantly in decades-old paperwork. Nobody had reason to scrutinize this closely before now. Dana said that was possible, and did not believe him for a second, filing the conversation away the same careful way she filed everything else that came with a smooth enough answer attached to it. Desmond made his decision 3 nights later, alone in the estate's records room after the household staff had gone to bed. He was certain Dana's investigation would reach the folder's remaining contents within the week, regardless of what excuses he offered her. He could not risk what remained in that file surfacing. Not after 20 years of a reputation built on being the one man in that family who never let a problem outlast his ability to manage it before anyone noticed. He rigged a small electrical fault in an outdated outlet behind the records cabinet, enough to start a contained fire he could report and extinguish personally before anyone questioned the timing too closely. He had not accounted for Clara, who had fallen asleep in the estate library 2 rooms over while finishing a debate outline, curled into an armchair with her laptop still open on her knees. The estate's old ventilation ductwork carried smoke toward the library faster than an alarm system built for a different era ever could. The smoke reached her before the alarm did, and by the time Talia woke to the sound of the alarm finally sounding, the hallway outside Clara's usual room was already thick enough to slow her down. Talia found Clara's actual location from a half-asleep Renee and ran for the library instead. She pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth, moving through smoke that stung her eyes badly enough that she was navigating more by memory than by sight. She found Clara coughing but conscious, disoriented enough that she had frozen instead of moving toward the door. Talia got an arm under her and half carried her toward the hallway, her sleeve catching and tearing against a fallen shelf bracket in the doorway, the fabric ripping clean up to her elbow. Neither of them noticed it until they were both outside on the lawn, safe, breathing hard in the cold October air. Weston was already running toward them across the grass, having heard the alarm from his study and reached the front doors moments after Talia and Clara made it out themselves. He grabbed Clara first, checking her over with shaking hands. Then he saw Talia's exposed forearm in the porch light, the burn scar running from her wrist nearly to her elbow, shaped, unmistakably, like the edge of a window frame. He had seen a description of that very scar in his father's case file an hour earlier. It was written by a firefighter who had glimpsed it 15 years ago on a young woman running from a burning building, someone else's baby already safely handed off. Weston did not say anything for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough in a way Talia had never heard from him. "It was you," he said. 15 years ago. It was you the whole time." Talia, still catching her breath, told him yes, it had been her, and that she had spent 15 years telling almost no one, including, for 3 months, him. Dana, arriving with the fire crew, found the records room smoke detector manually disabled and Desmond's own access code logged into that room 11 minutes before the alarm sounded. She flagged both details for the responding fire marshal rather than call it arson herself, and brought them straight to Weston before Desmond had finished rehearsing an explanation in the front hall. Weston confronted him directly, Talia's torn sleeve and the case file's description fresh in his mind. "You closed that interview lead 15 years ago," Weston said. Dana has the missing pages you claimed involved a confidential informant who never existed, and now she has your own code logged into the room the same night it burned. Desmond's first answer was flat denial. I have protected this family for 2 decades, he said. I would not risk everything I have built over an old paperwork error. Weston said it was not a paperwork error. It was a deliberately buried interview with the woman who saved his sister's life, and he asked Desmond, directly, why a man with nothing to hide would set a fire to keep it buried. Desmond's composure cracked further. You want to talk about what people hide, he said, his voice rising. Ask yourself why a maid who once carried a stranger's baby out of a burning house took a job in this house and told no one who she was. Weston told him that accusation would not work twice in one night, and that the only person in the room who had anything left to hide was standing in front of him. Desmond did not speak for a long moment. When he finally did, the fight had gone out of his voice completely. I did not set that first fire, he said, but I knew who did, within a week, and I took money to make sure the investigation never reached far enough to find out. Your mother was not supposed to die that night. That was never the plan. I have spent 15 years making sure nobody ever learned how close I came to being the reason the truth stayed buried forever. Weston had Desmond held in the front hall until the responding officers arrived, his decades of service ending in the space of one conversation. He found Talia afterward, sitting with Clara on the porch steps, both of them wrapped in blankets someone from the household had brought out. He sat down beside Talia and told her, plainly, that he had spent 15 years wanting to thank the person who saved his sister and 3 months failing to recognize her standing in his own kitchen. I am sorry for what I said to you Thursday night, he said. You did not deserve any of it, then or now. May I? He asked, reaching for her hand. Talia laced her fingers through his and said nothing at all, answering him the only way that mattered between them. Desmond was taken into custody that same night, once the fire marshal's preliminary findings confirmed what Dana had already suspected. The new fire gave prosecutors charges that were not 15 years old: arson, reckless endangerment, and evidence tampering, while his own confession reopened the original case in every way that mattered. Franco Yellerin, facing his own exposure, cooperated fully with investigators rather than risk prosecution for his role in the earlier cover-up. He filled in details that finally closed the 15-year-old case for good. Clara took the news of Talia's history with more grace than either adult expected. She spent an entire evening asking Talia questions about that night, with the frank curiosity of someone finally allowed to understand her own life's central mystery. You saved me, Clara said, more than once, as though she needed to say it aloud a few times before it became fully real. Talia told her, honestly, that she had not thought of it as saving anyone at the time, only as running toward the one sound she could not make herself ignore. Clara asked whether she would do it again, knowing everything it had cost her. Talia did not hesitate before answering yes. Talia gave her notice at the estate 2 weeks later, telling Weston plainly that she needed to be something other than staff before she could figure out what else she might want to be to him. I did not save your sister so that I could earn a place in this family, she said. I want to choose my place here, if I ever have one, not have it handed to me out of guilt or gratitude. He told her he understood and did not argue. Talia finished out the month and moved into a paid position with a burn survivor foundation Weston's mother had once quietly supported. She began building the support group she had wanted to start for years, the secret she had carried for 15 years finally light enough to set down in front of other people. 3 months later, Weston asked whether he could take her to dinner, not as her former employer, not as Clara's guardian, and not as a man repaying a debt. You may ask me again when you are certain gratitude is not speaking for you, she told him. He asked her again some weeks after that, and this time she said yes. He came to one of her sessions before that, sitting in the back without announcing himself. He told her afterward that he had never fully understood, until he heard her speak, how much courage her silence all those years had actually cost her. If someone in your life had been quietly carrying a truth that could change everything you understood about them, would you want to know it? Even if the truth arrived wrapped in old pain neither of you chose? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about hidden courage, second chances, and the truths that finally set people free. Thank you for listening to this story. I wish you peace, always. I am Sunny, and I love you.